Joining me now for more is Shaw Galani, Capital Wave Forecast Editor, Scott Hodge, Tax Foundation President, Mattie Duppler, National Taxpayer Union Senior Fellow, and here in studio with me, David Nelson, Bell Point Asset Management's Chief Strategist. You know, Mattie, I don't know if you saw the whole thing, the whole event with President Trump down there in West Virginia. I was so moved when this one mother stood up and talked about the impact, the personal impact. She almost broke down in tears of the tax cuts that they've had for her. And I think that's the best way to look at this. Forget about all the polls and all the surveys. They say that's mixed results. That woman to me represents what it's all about. Do we need another one, though?
I absolutely agree with you. This is the story that every Republican needs to be telling for the rest of the year. And that's the story of the American people, the people who, as you heard today, are able now to redo their kitchens, which they've wanted to do for years and years. The family talking about how they could take a little bit of their extra tax dollars and give them back to their church that is doing work on combating the opioid crisis. These are stories of what happens when Americans are given their own money back to spend the way that they would like to invest in their communities, their families, and their businesses. So going forward, I would like to see all Republicans having these types of town hall meetings with Americans to tell their story. And this will really seed the ground for more tax reform in the future. There's still plenty of work to be done. You had the president talk about expensing a little bit earlier in that clip. We need permanency on some of the things that was done in tax reform. So certainly with the stories being told about how successful tax reform will be in this first iteration, that will allow politicians to then have energy to continue to reform the tax code in future iterations.
Scott, you know, I got to think that this so far is the biggest feather in the cap of President Trump outside of other things, you know, on the conservative side, like the Supreme Court justice and federal judges that he's been able to appoint. The idea perhaps of the ability to get through another tax cut, and what would it look like in your mind?
Well, I think it has to be contain permanence for the many elements of the tax reform plan that were unfortunately made temporary. Full expensing is one of the key elements here, and the president sort of joked about it being boring, but it's absolutely critical to economic growth. And the fact that the tax cuts were made temporary really take a lot of the steam out of the growth potential of these plans. So if we're looking to improve this plan, we have to make these things permanent. Otherwise, we're not going to get the growth potential that the plan really can deliver.
Of course, today saw the market up for 3 days in a row, something that it could not do in the entire month of March. One of the reasons, of course, is perhaps a different view of this so-called trade war. I want the audience to take a listen to what President Trump had to say about his relationship with China.
In many respects, I think we're going to have a fantastic relationship long-term with China, but we have to get this straightened out. We have to have some balance. And that goes for other countries, and it goes for other places. If you look at the European Union, it's very solidly against us in terms of trade. It's very unfair. Look at a young girl shaking her head. Yes, you know about the European Union? It's like, it's almost, we can't even do business.
Now, Shaw, this morning, Jamie Dimon, CEO, chairman of J.P. Morgan, released a shareholder note. I was pretty surprised that he was more or less saying Trump is right. He said negotiations have not worked, that we do need to find a way to bring China, which is no longer a quote-unquote emerging economy, it's the world's #2 economy. They play by a different set of rules, and they should play by a new set of rules. How important is it that we get this right for sustained economic growth here and to keep this market going?
I think it's very important. The president has gotten it right. He got it right on the campaign trail. He's getting it right now. And I think these negotiations, the way they've started, because that's exactly what they are spot on. There's no big kerfuffle here. Everything is just going on very smoothly. The markets are reacting as if it's some big deal. It's nothing. This is the way negotiations should go. The Chinese have been very respectful. We've been respectful. There have been imbalances for years, for decades. So it needed to be addressed. It is being addressed. And I think in the final analysis, both sides will benefit. So this is terrific.
All right, Dave, what do you make of it? By the way, one line that stood out for me, there were many of them, to be quite frank with you, but Jamie Dimon, is the party says, when the U.S. administration talks about free and fair, it essentially means the same on all counts. That is not what has existed. It is not unreasonable for the United States to press ahead for more equivalency.
I would agree, and I'll piggyback on what Shaw just said. He's going after a lot here, and he understands that China thinks in decades. We tend to think in terms of an election cycle, and it's going to take a lot more theft of intellectual property is a big deal, and he wants to do something about it. But I think the danger for Americans and the danger for investors is to try to defend the status quo. That's what we tend to do in terms of we don't want to fight because we're afraid we might lose.
But the status quo is good, though, for quote-unquote Wall Street.
It's good,
the bigwigs downtown, the folks who, you know, I mean, this is, you know, they don't want to see Boeing stock go down or Caterpillar stock go down, even if it's short-term.
It's short-sighted, though, because if you think into the out years, I think Larry Kudlow's right. The trend line was like this, and then we turned to something that was a little bit more flat. We should be fighting for, you know, we shouldn't be playing the prevent defense, which so many of us want to do.
Mattie, you're something of an economic purist. What are your thoughts on this? Because most economic purists were a little upset with this whole idea of tariffs and a trade war.
I believe that we need to have an open economy, and that means open, fair, and free trade. So looking at what the Trump administration has proposed, we need to be careful. Entering into a trade war is not the way to make sure that American consumers and businesses are being treated fairly. Now, there are a number of ways that we can look at the way that the United States does business abroad and wonder maybe if we can do it better. Certainly what the president has said about NAFTA, the fact that it's not a 21st century agreement, definitely looking at that and trying to update that is a one way that we can make sure that America is competing fairly with all the other countries abroad. Certainly IP in China is a big issue that we need to make sure we're protecting our intellectual property. But here, at the end of the day, what we need to make sure is the #1 priority for American lawmakers is that the United States is the #1 place to do business. So when we're looking at what our economic policies should be, that should be the question every lawmaker is asking themselves.
You know, Scott, here's the thing. The media is saying, and the economic purists are saying that tariffs are the main weapons of a trade war. If that's the case, then we've been in a trade war for a very long time. And China's been using a bazooka because they've got significantly higher tariffs than we do, and they seem to be winning, judging by their GDP growth.
This is a really dangerous game that they're playing. Look, the administration is talking about putting $50 billion worth of tariffs or taxes on Chinese imported goods. That would take back about 1/3 of the tax cuts that Americans just got. So if a typical family got $1,000 in tax relief, more than $300 of that could be taken back with these tariffs. And we have to understand first and foremost that the tax reform plan that they just passed just made American products more competitive in the global market. So let's let tax reform help Americans become more competitive, and we don't need these kind of tariffs to punish the Chinese or any other country.
If you don't, I got to weigh in here. If you don't exchange some blows, then you're going to get rolled over.
Yeah.
Well, you cannot do this unilaterally. They should have been engaging our European allies and other allies in this and not doing this on a one-on-one basis. I think this is a recipe, a really dangerous recipe that could harm the American economy.
I hear where you're coming from too, Scott, but I got to tell you, I mean, really honestly, we wait for our European allies, we might be waiting a long time. We're out of time.
They're being hurt as well.
They are, but they're not fighters.
They should join us.
But they're not fighters. I wish they would join us. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. Now, the race to replace West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin is on, and the GOP is determined to snap its streak of running toxic general election candidates. Can they do it? We've got the details next.